I need to read the names file and then write the story. The names to avoid are Frank, Richie, Walt, Patricia, Nathan Cole, Derek, Gerald, Beverly. Now I'll write the story applying all the analyzed patterns. I remember the exact moment I knew something was wrong. It was a Tuesday, late October, around 4:30 in the afternoon. The kind of Tuesday where the light through the office windows goes flat and gray and everybody's counting down to 5 o'clock. I was at my desk finishing up the quarterly account summary for our 3 biggest clients: Hendricks Manufacturing, Coastal Supply Group, and a regional logistics company out of Charlotte we've been growing for 2 years. Combined, those 3 accounts brought in just under $2.3 million annually. I knew every detail of those relationships by heart. The contact names, their kids' names, which ones wanted a call on Monday mornings versus which ones only communicated by email. I'd built all 3 from scratch. My manager walked past my desk without stopping. Didn't look at me. That wasn't unusual. He was the kind of guy who moved through the office like he was always slightly late for something. What was unusual was that he was smiling. Not the tight, distracted smile he gave clients on the phone. A real smile. The kind that meant something had gone right for him personally. I didn't think much of it. 2 days later, I found out what it meant. I'm going to back up a little because this story doesn't make sense without the context. I joined Meridian Solutions about 7 years before any of this happened. Small to mid-size B2B consulting firm, maybe 60 employees at the time, headquartered in Raleigh. I came in as a senior account manager after 12 years at a larger firm in Atlanta. I took a small pay cut to join Meridian because my then-wife and I had decided to move back closer to her family in North Carolina, and Meridian was the best opportunity in the area at the time. My manager's name was Cliff. He'd been with the company for almost 15 years, worked his way up to Director of Client Relations, and he ran our department with a particular kind of confidence that bordered on arrogance but usually got results, so nobody questioned it. I reported directly to him. For most of those 7 years, we had a functional relationship. He gave me latitude, I delivered numbers, and we stayed out of each other's way on most things. What Cliff liked about me was that I didn't need much managing. I came in, handled my accounts, brought in new business when the opportunity was there, and kept my client retention numbers at or above target every single year. I trained 4 people during my time there. I built out the onboarding process that the department still used. I covered 2 other managers' accounts for 3 months when we had back-to-back departures and never let a single client feel the disruption. I'm not telling you this to make myself sound exceptional. I'm telling you because it matters to what happened next. About 8 months before everything fell apart, Cliff started mentioning his daughter in conversation. Casually at first. She'd just finished an MBA program. Very sharp, he said. Great instincts for client relationships. He said it the way proud fathers say things, with that particular warmth that's not really asking for your opinion. I said something polite. She sounds great. Something like that. I didn't connect any dots. Then she started showing up at the office. Her name was Sienna, 26 years old, MBA from a school in Virginia I'd heard of but didn't know much about. She was personable, I'll give her that. Good handshake, remembered names, laughed at the right moments. Cliff introduced her around the department like she was a new hire, which I assumed she was, temporary, maybe, or an internship arrangement. It wasn't unusual for family members to come through at smaller firms. I didn't think anything of it beyond mild curiosity. For about 6 weeks, Sienna shadowed different people in the department. She sat in on some of my client calls. I gave her the same courtesy I give any new person, explained the process, walked her through our CRM system, answered her questions. She asked decent questions, actually. I remember thinking she had more raw intelligence than some of the people I'd trained. What she didn't have was the experience. You can't manufacture the 7 years of reading rooms knowing when a client is 3 weeks from calling to complain before they actually call. Understanding the difference between a client who wants to be consulted on every decision versus one who wants you to just solve the problem and report back. That's not something an MBA teaches you. It's accumulated. It takes time. 6 weeks in, Cliff called me into his office on a Friday afternoon. He had the kind of office that told you everything about him. Dark wood desk, diplomas on the wall, a golf trophy on the credenza from a company tournament 6 years ago. He gestured to the chair across from him like he was doing me a favor by offering it. He told me he had some exciting news for the department. He told me they were creating a new position, client relations lead, a step above senior account manager, more strategic oversight, cross-departmental coordination, a seat at the leadership table during quarterly planning. He described it for about 3 minutes, and I sat there feeling something strange moving through my chest, because everything he was describing sounded like what I already did, but with a title and a salary adjustment to match. He told me Sienna would be taking the role. I heard him say it, but it took a moment to process. My brain kept trying to reread the sentence differently, looking for the version where it made sense. Sienna, he said again, she's ready for this. She has the academic foundation. She's been observing the operation, and she has the natural leadership qualities we're looking for. I said, Cliff, she's been here 6 weeks. He said, she's been preparing for this her whole life. I have thought about that sentence many, many times since. She's been preparing for this her whole life. I still don't entirely know what he meant by it. I think he believed it. I think that's the most unsettling part. I kept my voice level. I asked whether the position had been posted internally, whether there had been any formal consideration process. He said the decision had been made at the leadership level. I asked whether my performance over 7 years had been a factor in the evaluation. He looked at me the way people look at you when you're asking a question they find slightly embarrassing, and he said, "Of course, your contributions have always been valued here." I nodded. I stood up. I said I appreciated the clarity, and I walked out of his office with my jaw set so tight I could feel it in my temples. I went back to my desk and I sat there for probably 15 minutes not doing anything, just sitting, looking at the quarterly summary I'd been building all week. 3 clients, $2.3 million in annual revenue, 7 years, 4 people trained. Every process this department ran competently had my fingerprints on it somewhere. I didn't go home angry that night. I went home quiet, which is worse. My son was at his mom's for the week. We'd been divorced for 3 years by that point. Joint custody, working relationship, nothing dramatic. I came home to a quiet house, made a sandwich I didn't really taste, and sat at the kitchen table with a notepad. I don't usually write things down when I'm processing something, but this felt like a situation that needed to be thought through clearly, not just felt. I wrote down 2 columns. One side was reasons to stay. The other was reasons to go. The reasons to stay were mostly financial. I was 51 years old. I had a mortgage on the house I genuinely liked. I had my son's college fund that I was contributing to every month. I was making good money at Meridian, $82,000 base, bonus structure on top, solid benefits. Starting over at 51 in account management is not impossible, but it's not easy either. The market doesn't look at someone my age the same way it looks at someone in their 30s. The reasons to leave were harder to quantify but more fundamental. I had just watched a man I'd worked alongside for 7 years hand a job I had earned, not wanted, earned, to his 26-year-old daughter with 6 weeks of experience. And he had done it without apology, without explanation, with a kind of certainty that told me he had never once considered that it might be wrong. If I stayed, I would be reporting to Sienna, training her effectively, doing the actual work that justified her title, and watching Cliff look through me every day like I was a piece of furniture he'd stopped noticing. I tore up the notepad around midnight and went to bed. I came in Monday morning and behaved exactly as I always had. I answered emails, took my calls, handled my accounts. I was professional. I was competent. I said good morning to Sienna when I passed her in the hall. I gave her absolutely nothing to complain about. What I was doing, quietly, was building my exit. I reached out to 2 former colleagues from my Atlanta days, people I'd kept in loose contact with over the years. One of them was at a mid-size firm in Durham. The other had gone independent and was building a client base in the Southeast. I had conversations with both of them. Nothing formal at first, just reconnecting, catching up. I also had a conversation with a former client of mine who had left Hendrix Manufacturing 18 months earlier and was now VP of Business Development at a company in Greensboro. He'd always said, "If you ever want to make a move, let's talk." I took him up on it. Within 3 weeks, I had 2 offers on the table. One was a lateral move with a small bump in base. The other was a senior director role with a $23,000 salary increase and a cleaner client portfolio. I took the director role. I submitted my resignation on a Thursday morning, typed letter, printed, placed on Cliff's desk before he arrived. He called me into his office by 8:45. He was not smiling this time. He went through the stages of his reaction quickly, like he was running through a script he'd written in his head on the way in. First, he asked if this was about the promotion, which he called the restructuring. I said yes, in part. He said I should have communicated my concerns rather than making a rash decision. I told him I had communicated my concerns. In his office the Friday, he told me about Sienna, and he had told me my contributions were valued and moved on. He looked momentarily off balance, then moved to the next stage. He told me that my client relationships would not transfer with me, that those accounts belonged to Meridian, not to me. He mentioned the non-solicitation clause in my employment agreement. I had already had a conversation with an employment attorney before I submitted the letter. The non-solicitation clause was narrow. It covered direct solicitation of current Meridian clients for a period of 6 months. It did not prohibit former clients from contacting me. It did not prohibit me from working in the same industry. It did not give Meridian ownership of relationships that took 7 years and considerable personal investment to build. I told Cliff I was familiar with the terms of my agreement and was comfortable with my obligations under it. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he asked if I would stay through the end of the month to transition my accounts. I said I would honor my 2-week notice period as specified in my contract. During those 2 weeks, I would document my accounts thoroughly and make myself available for process questions. I would not, I added, be leading any client introduction calls on behalf of Sienna, as I didn't think that would serve the clients or the company well in the long run. That was a boundary I was setting, not a negotiation. He started to say something and then stopped. I thanked him for 7 years and excused myself. On the way back to my desk, I passed the open area where most of the department sat. My colleague across from me, a guy named Todd who'd been there almost as long as I had, looked up when I walked by. He could read the situation in my face. He'd been watching Sienna's arrival with the same quiet calculation I had. By lunch, he had told me he was also considering leaving. By the end of that week, 2 other members of the department had started making their own inquiries. I want to be careful here because I'm not proud of everything about this part. I didn't orchestrate what happened. I didn't encourage anyone to follow me or make any coordinated plan. What I did was tell the truth when people asked me directly, and what was true was that my decision felt right to me and that the reasons I was leaving weren't complicated or personal. They were structural. When a company makes a decision like the one Cliff made, it doesn't just insult one person. It sends a signal to every person in that department about what the rules actually are. Todd read that signal. So did the others. By the end of my 2-week notice, Todd had accepted an offer elsewhere. One of the other 2 had given her notice. The 4th was still working through his options, but had made clear he was actively looking. The 2-week period itself was strange. Sienna was now formally in her title, sitting in the office 1 down from Cliff's. In meetings I used to attend, I was doing my documentation work, writing up every account in careful detail, making sure my successors would have what they needed. I kept things professional. I didn't badmouth anyone, didn't let bitterness leak into my work. If I was going to leave, I was going to leave in a way I could live with. On my last day, I cleared my desk, returned my equipment, shook hands with the people I genuinely liked, and walked out. Cliff was in a meeting. We did not say goodbye. About 6 weeks after I started my new position, I got a call from the VP at Hendrix Manufacturing, the contact I'd worked with there for 5 of my 7 years at Meridian. He said he wanted to catch up. We met for lunch. He told me things had been bumpy since my departure, that the new person handling their account, Sienna, was trying hard but hadn't yet demonstrated the deep familiarity with their business that he'd come to rely on. He said there had been a couple of miscommunications, a missed detail on a contract renewal that created confusion internally. He asked how I was doing. I told him honestly. Good position, good people, feeling energized in a way I hadn't felt at Meridian in some time. He said, "We consider following you, but we'd need to know your current employer was a good fit for our needs." I told him I'd be happy to set up an introduction with our senior team. 6 weeks later, Hendricks Manufacturing signed a contract with my new employer. I heard through industry contacts that the loss of that account was significant enough to prompt an internal review at Meridian, that Coastal Supply Group had also initiated conversations with competitors, that the board had asked Cliff some pointed questions about the departure of 4 experienced department members in the span of 60 days, and whether the restructuring had been adequately planned. I didn't seek that information out. It came to me the way things do in a mid-size industry where people talk. What I heard last through the same channels was different in character from the rest. One of the people still at Meridian, someone I'd always respected who'd stayed out of the drama, told me something about Sienna that stopped me in my tracks. About 4 months into her tenure as client relations lead, Sienna had apparently gone to Cliff's office and had a long conversation. The person who told me this hadn't heard the conversation directly but had heard from someone who had. What Sienna reportedly said was something along these lines, that she hadn't fully understood, when she accepted the role, what she was walking into, that she could see now that the people who'd left had built something she'd been placed on top of without being ready. That she felt the weight of a position she hadn't earned and didn't know yet how to earn. That she was asking her father not for reassurance but for honesty. Was she actually the right person for this? Or had he done this for himself? I don't know what Cliff said back. I wasn't there. I'm not sure I need to know. What I know is that Sienna reportedly requested a change to her role, something more clearly tied to business development, where she could build her own relationships from scratch rather than inheriting one she didn't have the standing to sustain. The structural title was quietly adjusted. Meridian brought in an external hire to manage the major accounts. I heard all of this and I sat with it for a while. There is a version of this story where I feel vindicated and Cliff gets everything he deserves and the ending is clean. Life isn't usually that clean, and I've been around long enough not to need it to be. Cliff still has his position as far as I know. He may have learned something or he may not have. That's not in my control. What I know is this. I was 51 years old and I was afraid to leave. Afraid of the mortgage, the age, the archit, the uncertainty. Every reasonable voice in my head was building a case for staying, and what I had to decide was whether the reasonable case was also the right case. It wasn't. I've been at my new company for just over a year now. The senior director role has been everything I was told it would be. I brought in 2 accounts that now rank among their top 10. I have a team of 4 I'm genuinely proud of. I sleep better than I have in years, and I don't think that's a small thing. My son is 18, leaves for college in the fall. He asked me recently, not about any of this directly, but in the way kids ask about things sideways, how I know when to walk away from something. I told him the honest answer. When the cost of staying becomes higher than the fear of leaving, you've been holding on too long. He nodded like he already half knew that and was just waiting to hear someone say it out loud. I think about Sienna sometimes, not with bitterness. She was handed something she hadn't asked for by a man who thought he was doing her a favor, and she had to reckon with that herself. The reckoning she apparently did do, asking hard questions, requesting something she could actually earn. That took a kind of honesty I respect. I hope she's building something real now. I genuinely do. As for Cliff, I think he believed completely and without irony that he was making a good business decision. I think he told himself a story about his daughter's potential and decided the story was true because he needed it to be. That's not unique to him. People do it all the time. The difference is that when you're in a position of authority, the stories you tell yourself have consequences for other people. That's the thing about nepotism that its architects never seem to understand. They think the only person they're disadvantaging is the one who didn't get the job. They don't see that they're also disadvantaging the person they handed it to by putting them in a position they can't sustain, surrounded by people who know the math, and they're disadvantaging the company itself by draining the institutional knowledge and the loyalty that took years to build in a single decision made in an office with a golf trophy on the credenza. I walked out of that building on a Friday afternoon in November with a box that wasn't very full, because I'm not a person who accumulates much at a desk. I drove home with the windows down even though it was cold, stopped at a diner I liked, had coffee and eggs at 4 in the afternoon, read the newspaper. It felt, against all odds, like relief. I didn't know yet whether the new job would work out. I didn't know what would happen to the accounts I'd left. I didn't know what Sienna would do or what Cliff would eventually face. I just knew I had left with my integrity intact, which sounds like something you put on a motivational poster, but is actually one of the only things that belongs to you completely and can't be restructured away by someone with a nicer office. That's worth more than I can calculate, and I'm still counting. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened, and I think the thing that still surprises me most isn't what Cliff did. It's how long I almost didn't leave. That's the part nobody talks about. The leaving is the dramatic moment, the resignation letter, the quiet walk out the door. But before any of that, there were weeks of sitting at my kitchen table at midnight, running the numbers, talking myself in circles. 51 years old, mortgage, my son's college fund, 7 years of institutional knowledge that I'd convinced myself made me indispensable, when really it had just made me comfortable. Fear dressed up as reason is still fear. I know that now. What Cliff did had a logic to it. Even if the logic was wrong, he looked at his daughter and he saw potential. And he looked at me and he saw a constant, something he could rely on, something that would stay put, something that didn't require much attention because it had always worked fine on its own. That's the quiet penalty for being dependable. People stop factoring in what it would cost to lose you. They assume your presence is a permanent condition rather than a choice you're making every day. The cause and effect here isn't complicated once you see it clearly. Cliff made a decision rooted entirely in what he wanted to be true, rather than what was actually true. He wanted his daughter to succeed. He wanted to believe that wanting it enough made it a sound business call. That disconnect between what we wish for and what we've actually built is what collapsed the department around him. Not my resignation, not Todd leaving or the others who followed. The collapse started the moment Cliff chose comfort over honesty, for himself and for Sienna both. And Sienna, I think about her more than I expected to. She didn't manufacture that situation. She was handed something by someone who loved her, and she had to figure out what to do with it in front of everyone who already knew it wasn't earned. The fact that she eventually asked hard questions, that she went back to her father and asked for something real instead of something given, that took more integrity than most people twice her age manage. I respect that genuinely. She'll build something real eventually. That's what happens when you stop borrowing someone else's foundation and start pouring your own. What I learned, or maybe what I remembered, is that intelligence without honesty is just strategy, and strategy without ethics eventually collapses into itself. Cliff was smart enough to build a good department around competent people. He wasn't honest enough to honor what that department had actually cost those people to build. The result wasn't punishment from any external force. It was simply the natural consequence of a structure built on something that couldn't hold weight. The resilience part, the part I'm most proud of, wasn't walking out. It was getting up the next morning and building again, at 51, in a new place with new people, from scratch. That's the thing about integrity. It's portable. Everything else, the title, the accounts, the years, those stay where you leave them. But who you are when you walk out the door, that comes with you. I'm still building. And this time I know exactly what the foundation is made of.